I thought life in my peaceful suburban neighborhood was calm and predictable until the HOA tried to take control of my private gate. What started as a ridiculous demand turned into a battle for my property rights, and somehow I became the voice of the entire community. What would you do if your privacy was threatened by people who claim to have power but might actually be breaking the law? It all began one quiet Saturday morning. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when a loud, unexpected knock rattled my front door. The shock made me spill hot coffee all over my favorite shirt. Great start to the day, right? Annoyed, I stormed to the door, ready to tell off whoever dared to bang like that before 8 a.m. Standing there was Diane Morgan, wearing her usual forced smile, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. She was holding a clipboard like she meant business. "Good morning, neighbor," she chirped, way too cheerful for someone who just ruined my morning. "I'm the new president of the Pine Haven Gardens HOA," she said, handing me an envelope with a bold, red HOA stamp across the top. "I'm delivering urgent notices myself today." Still wiping coffee from my shirt, I opened it and asked, "What is this?" Her grin widened. "The board voted last night. You have 7 days to give us keys to your driveway gate." I stared at her, completely confused. My private gate? Why on earth would I hand over keys to that? She pointed toward my fenced backyard. "Your property sits on the corner, and it's the perfect shortcut between Maple Street and Rosewood Lane. People lose nearly 5 minutes driving around it. As per section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws, we're allowed easement access." I could feel my blood pressure rising. I bought this house and paid extra for that corner lot because of the privacy. That's why I built the fence and installed the gate 2 years ago. I calmly told her, "This is a private property. That gate stays locked." Her fake smile disappeared in an instant. "This isn't a friendly ask," she snapped. "The board already voted. You have 7 days to give us access, or you'll be fined $100 a day." She flipped her clipboard around and showed me a sheet full of signatures. Thomas Reynolds, her husband. Margaret Wilson, the one with the massive house on Rosewood Lane. Kevin Jang, quiet in meetings, but always votes with the board. I took a deep breath. Maybe I should review my property documents. I don't think the HOA can demand access to a private driveway. Diane narrowed her eyes and said, "You're welcome to check, but section 12.4 is crystal clear. 7 days. Then the fines start." She spun around and strutted off, but not before shouting over her shoulder, "Oh, and your hedges are 3 inches too high. Better fix that before our next inspection." I shut the door and leaned back against it, hands trembling. Who do they think they are? I've lived here for 4 years, longer than most of them, and suddenly they're acting like they own the place. That afternoon, as I was weeding the front yard, I saw Thomas Reynolds driving his huge black SUV, but instead of turning the corner like usual, he slowed down and then drove right across my lawn. Yes, my lawn. He cut across the edge of my yard to save maybe 10 seconds. When he saw me staring in shock, he actually smiled and waved before speeding off. I was stunned. Now it was crystal clear. They'd probably been eyeing this shortcut for a while. Diane's demand for my gate key suddenly made perfect sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. Diane's smug smile, Thomas driving through my grass, that ridiculous section 12.4. Around 2 a.m., I got up, turned on the lights, and pulled out my home purchase documents. Because if they thought they could bully me, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I pulled out every single document from when I bought this house, deeds, maps, HOA records, and spread them all across my dining table. I stayed up all night, combing through every detail. Finally, just as the sun started to rise, I found it. In the fine print of my original deed, there it was, proof that my home was purchased before the HOA even existed. And even better, My driveway was legally marked as private property, no mention of easements, no loopholes. They had zero right to demand access. I clutched the paper like a winning lottery ticket. I had them, cold. But just as I was about to finally crash into bed, I heard a car outside. I peeked through the window just in time to see Margaret Wilson's bright red car slowly driving over the edge of my yard, leaving fresh tire tracks right next to the ones her buddy Thomas had made the day before. This wasn't just a demand anymore, it was full-on war. I stood there in my pajamas, holding my deed, and made a choice. I wasn't backing down, I was going to fight, and I was going to win. The next morning, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, still running on caffeine and adrenaline. "They absolutely cannot force you to give them access," said James Wilson, my attorney, adjusting his glasses as he studied the paperwork. "Your deed predates the HOA by 2 full years. That's protected under a grandfather clause. Your driveway is off limits." Relief washed over me. "So I just tell them no?" I asked. James shook his head. "It's not that easy. They may not have legal power, but HOAs are known for playing dirty. Expect harassment, fines, inspections, constant pressure." I swallowed hard. "They're already driving on my lawn. What else can they do?" He raised a finger for each. "Nitpicking rules, surprise violations, fines for nonsense, peer pressure. I have seen them bully homeowners into selling and leaving." I clenched my fists. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." "Then let's do this smart," he said, grabbing a notepad. "Step 1, send a cease and desist letter. Step 2, install security cameras. Step 3, show up at the next HOA meeting with copies of your deed. And 4, prepare for pushback." I left his office with a plan and headed straight to the hardware store. 4 high-end security cameras, and a long afternoon later, I had full coverage of my yard from every angle. As I adjusted the final camera, I spotted Diane strolling by with her annoying little dog. She stopped and looked up at me. "Security cameras?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Didn't see a request for those. You know board approval is required for exterior modifications." "They're temporary," I said coolly, "to document trespassers on my property." Her face turned red. "We'll see about that," she snapped, yanking her dog's leash. "Thursday evening, HOA meeting. I expect to get your keys then." I looked her dead in the eye. "Actually, I'll be there, with copies of my deed, and you're going to have a lot of explaining to do." The next morning, I walked outside and found my mailbox smashed in, the post cracked clean at the base. Hours later, my attorney's cease and desist letters were sent to every HOA board member by certified mail. Their response? A petty, cowardly one. That night, as I washed dishes, I heard a crash out front. I ran to the door just in time to see tail lights vanishing around the corner. When I got outside, I found my garden lights shattered and my bird bath knocked over. I ran to check the footage, and there it was, clear as day. Thomas Reynolds and his teenage son stomping on my solar lights and laughing like it was some joke. The next morning, I took the video straight to the police. Officer Martinez shook her head. "We see this stuff a lot with HOA drama, but the damage is under $500. It's a misdemeanor. We'll talk to them, but don't expect much." When I got home, I found a bright orange notice stuck to my front door. Unauthorized security cameras, $75 fine, unkept yard debris, $50 fine. Total due, $125 within 14 days. The debris was the broken lights and mailbox they had destroyed. That night, I printed out flyers, screenshots from the security footage with timestamps and dates, and delivered them to every house in the neighborhood. No commentary, just the truth. By morning, my phone was blowing up. Some neighbors thanked me. Others blamed me for causing trouble. And then came Diane's mass email. accusing me of spreading doctored images and attacking respected members of the community. I was in my kitchen making lunch when I heard the sound of engines. Looking out, I saw 3 cars lined up at the edge of my lawn. Diane's white sedan, Thomas's SUV, Margaret's red car. One by one they drove across my grass, slowly, deliberately, laughing as they carved deep ruts into my yard. I was shaking with rage as I hit record on my phone, but they were gone too fast. Then I got a call. It was Emma Jenkins, my neighbor across the street. "I saw everything," she said, furious. "This is beyond wrong. A bunch of us are planning to attend the HOA meeting and back you up." That moment nearly brought me to tears. "Thank you, Emma," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Diane's been president for less than a month, and already half the neighborhood wants her out. The problem is, people are scared. But you're giving them courage." I looked out at my destroyed lawn and realized this wasn't about a driveway anymore. This was a message, and now it was my turn to respond. So I did the one thing I knew would shake them up. I began researching driveway security. When I saw pictures of retractable security spikes, I couldn't help but smile. Price tag, $500, 2-week delivery. Still, that wasn't soon enough. Then came a knock. It was Mr. Franklin, the 78-year-old retired engineer who lived at the end of the street. "Been watching all this nonsense," he said, without a hello. "Saw those jerks driving across your lawn. Shameful." "Come in," I offered, overwhelmed with gratitude. He settled in with a cup of coffee and started sketching on a notepad. "Back in my day, we handled problems ourselves. I've got some parts in my garage. We could build a custom retractable spike system, cheap and effective. Could have it ready this weekend, if you're up for it." I stared at his detailed drawings. "Are you serious?" I asked. 100%, he said, tapping the sketch. "And there's one more thing. My grandson works for..." As the sun set, I received another official envelope from the HOA. 6 fresh violations. Dirty driveway, unauthorized bird feeder color. The list was ridiculous. $450 in fines. I immediately dialed Emma. "How many neighbors are fed up with Diane?" I asked. "At least a dozen," she said. "She fined the Rodriguez family for leaving up Christmas lights one day past her new rule." "Can you get everyone to my place tonight? 8 p.m.? By 8 p.m., 14 neighbors were in my living room. I handed out copies of my property deed, the cease and desist letter, and snapshots of the vandalism. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke up first. "Last month, Thomas parked his boat outside my house for days while they had guests over. Nothing happened." Mr. Patel added, "Kevin threatened to report my kid's basketball hoop unless I voted for Thomas's brother's landscaping contract." The mood shifted from frustration to action. We had a plan. Document every abuse, attend the next HOA meeting, and speak out. "And one more thing," I said. "Channel 8 is coming tomorrow morning." The next day, as the news van pulled up, Diane was walking her dog. Her face turned white when she saw the cameras. "We're filming a story on HOA abuse," the reporter said. "You can't film here without permission," Diane shouted. "We have permission from the homeowner," the reporter replied calmly, "and the footage we're using is documented and truthful." That night, the segment aired, HOA Gone Wild, When Power Corrupts Community Boards. They showed my footage, interviewed neighbors, and even mentioned the legal loophole in my deed that exempted my driveway from HOA jurisdiction. My phone rang after the broadcast. It was Thomas. "You've made a big mistake," he said, voice trembling. "We're holding an emergency meeting tonight. This won't end well for you." That evening, while Mr. Franklin and I finished installing the retractable spikes he designed, I noticed a car parked nearby. The silhouette inside looked a lot like Tyler Reynolds. "Ready to test it?" Mr. Franklin asked. I clicked the remote. Steel spikes rose silently from the edge of my driveway. Perfect, he whispered. They're not ready for this. That night, someone egged my front door and sprayed ketchup everywhere. One of the cameras had been painted black, but not before catching Tyler's face in the frame. At work the next day, my boss called me in. Thomas sent this to the whole company, she said, sliding me an email accusing me of being mentally unstable and threatening his family. This is harassment, I explained, showing her the news segment. She nodded. Just watch your back. People like that don't play fair. When I got home, chaos had unfolded. Neighbors, cops, and a furious Emma met me in the driveway. Thomas and Kevin tried to dismantle your gate with power tools while you were gone, claimed they had HOA authority. Mr. Franklin caught the whole thing on video. Officer Martinez was already collecting statements. They're being investigated for attempted destruction of private property, she told me. Diane drove past again, but this time, she didn't look smug. She looked nervous. The next night, the HOA meeting room was packed wall to wall. Officer Martinez stood in the back, arms crossed. Diane sat at the board table, looking uncomfortable. First agenda item, she muttered, property access rights for the lot at Maple and Rosewood. You mean the illegal demand for my keys and the vandalism on my property? I said loudly. Kevin jumped in. The board voted to enforce our easement rights under Section 12.4. I stood, raising my documents. There is no easement. My deed predates this HOA, and Section 12.4 doesn't apply to properties purchased before its existence. Gasps rippled across the room. I stood tall, holding up my property deed. This land was purchased before the HOA ever existed. My attorney and the county recorder's office have confirmed it. Thomas quickly jumped in, trying to change the subject. Maybe we should move on to other business. Not so fast, Emma called out from the crowd. We're here for answers about the board's behavior. 14 of us signed a petition demanding accountability for selective rule enforcement and outright abuse. A wave of murmurs spread across the packed room as Emma handed the petition to Margaret, who looked visibly nervous. This meeting will proceed according to procedure, Diane snapped, slamming her gavel. The board has been caught on camera destroying private property, Mr. Patel interjected, not to mention attempting to remove a resident's gate without consent. The room erupted in angry voices, but all went silent when Officer Martinez stood up. I'm not here in an official capacity, she said calmly, but with what's been happening, I thought it wise to attend. Diane turned crimson. This is a private matter for the HOA. Actually, said a man standing in the aisle, state law mandates all HOA meetings be open to homeowners. He nodded respectfully. I'm Jason Lee, legal counsel for several residents in this room. Thomas leaned over to whisper something to Diane, but she shook her head sharply. I move that we rescind the demand for gate access, Margaret suddenly declared, catching everyone off guard. New information suggests we may have exceeded our authority. Kevin looked baffled. Thomas shot Margaret a glare, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. I second, said Mrs. Rodriguez. We can't just... Thomas began, but Diane cut him off. All in favor? Hands shot up across the room, including Margaret's and Kevin's. Thomas sat back, fuming. Motion carries, Diane said stiffly. The board formally withdraws its request. It was a win, but we weren't done. What about the vandalism, the harassment, the fake violations? I asked, standing. Thomas and Tyler destroyed my property. Kevin tried removing my gate with power tools. Thomas jumped up. You can't prove any of that. That footage could be anyone. A voice called from the back. Actually, we have multiple eyewitnesses and crystal clear video. The Channel 8 reporter stepped forward with his cameraman. We're working on a follow-up segment on HOA transparency. Mind if we film this public meeting? Diane looked like she was about to faint. This meeting is adjourned, she blurted. gathering her papers. "One moment," said Jason Lee, cutting in. "According to your bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, a member motion takes precedence over adjournment if seconded." "I move for an emergency recall vote of the entire board," Emma declared, "based on documented rule violations, unethical conduct, and breaches of state law." "Second," shouted over 10 people at once. What followed was 2 of the most intense hours our neighborhood had ever seen. One by one, residents shared stories of threats, favoritism, and shady finances. Mr. Franklin passed around documents. The landscaping contract went up 40% and was awarded to Thomas's brother. "And the HOA reserve fund," he added, "down by $30,000 with no explanation." By the end of the meeting, we had 2 major wins: a full audit of HOA finances, an emergency election set for the following week. As the crowd dispersed, Margaret approached quietly. "Check the Rosewood Lane development records," she whispered. "That's what this was all about." The next morning, I visited the county records office. After digging through files for nearly an hour, I found it. Plans for a massive housing development behind Rosewood Lane. The only viable construction access through my property. The company listed, Reynolds Construction LLC, owned by none other than Thomas Reynolds. It wasn't about neighbor access, it was about moving heavy construction equipment onto land worth millions. When I returned home, Diane's white sedan came slowly down the road. Then, without warning, she floored the gas and sped directly at my driveway. "No!" I shouted, fumbling for the remote. Just as her tires crossed the boundary, I hit the button. Pop! Pop! Her tires exploded as they hit the concealed steel spikes. The car skidded to a stop, just feet from my garage. Diane stumbled out, furious. "You maniac! You ruined my car!" "You trespassed on clearly marked private property," I said calmly, pointing to the brand new signs and the high-def camera above the door. As if on cue, the Channel 8 van turned the corner. The reporter stepped out with his microphone. "You planned this!" Diane screamed. Noticing the camera crew, "You set me up!" "I protected my property," I replied, showing video on my phone of her car driving over my lawn last week. "The spikes only activate on my land. You had no right to be here." The reporter stepped forward. "Mrs. Morgan, care to comment on your HOA's development plans with Reynolds Construction?" Diane went pale. "No comment," she muttered. "Then I need to call my husband." She looked at her car, 4 tires flattened, and slumped into the driver's seat. Across the street, Emma gave me a proud thumbs up. Mr. Franklin laughed quietly at the spectacle. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. That evening, the HOA recall meeting filled the community center beyond capacity. Extra chairs were brought in, but many still stood against the walls. Mr. Franklin helped me set up the projector, while Jason Lee reviewed our presentation. Emma sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the door. "They'll show," she whispered. "They can't afford not to." Right in cue, Thomas and Diane walked in, followed by a cold-eyed man in an expensive suit. The final showdown had arrived. Thomas looked like a shadow of the man we once knew, hollow-eyed, pale, with his tie barely holding together. Diane, always immaculately put together, couldn't hide the exhaustion behind layers of concealer. Mrs. Rodriguez, the temporary chairperson, called the meeting to order. "First item on the agenda," she said firmly, "the results of the financial audit." Jason Lee stepped forward, carrying a folder and a USB stick. "Our preliminary findings are concerning," he began, connecting his laptop to the projector. "Over the past 12 months, approximately $74,000 of HOA funds were disbursed to vendors without proper authorization or documentation." A wave of gasps spread through the room. Jason clicked to the next slide. The largest payout, $42,000, went to Evergreen Landscaping. However, there's no evidence the work was ever done. He paused, then continued. Evergreen Landscaping is legally registered to Richard Reynolds, the brother of Thomas Reynolds. Thomas shot to his feet, his voice cracking. This is a witch hunt. Those were legitimate expenses. Jason remained calm. Authorized by whom? The board never voted on these payments. Only you, Diane, and Kevin signed off. Kevin, seated far from the others, kept his gaze on the floor. In fact, Jason added, Kevin has provided a signed affidavit stating he was misled into believing they were emergency maintenance costs. Then came the next bombshell. Jason advanced the slide to architectural renderings. Now, regarding the proposed Rosewood Lane development, Thomas's attorney, finally speaking, stood up. My client isn't required to disclose private business activities in this setting. Jason countered, without missing a beat. Your client used his position on the HOA to pursue commercial interests, including trying to gain unauthorized access to private property. That is very much relevant. I raised my hand. May I? Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. I walked up, plugged in my flash drive, and opened the documents I had obtained from the county records office. On screen appeared detailed blueprints. This is a proposed 38-unit townhouse development directly behind Rosewood Lane, I said, and the only viable construction access, right through my property. A series of emails followed between Thomas and the city's planning department, clearly discussing the access issue. Thomas's face drained of color. How did you get those? He asked, voice tight. Public records request, I replied. Anything submitted to the Planning Commission is a matter of public record. His attorney leaned in to whisper, but Thomas waved him off. Yeah, I'm developing that land, Thomas blurted. It'll raise property values. You should be grateful. By vandalizing my property, I said quietly. By pretending to act on behalf of the HOA to force an easement without ever disclosing your real intent? We offered to pay you, Thomas shouted. Silence. You just admitted everything, someone muttered from the crowd. No, I didn't, Thomas stammered, suddenly aware of the dozens of people staring at him. You demanded my gate keys under false authority, I said. You never once mentioned a construction project. Diane grabbed Thomas's arm, trying to pull him down. He shook her off. Jason turned to the crowd. The Planning Commission has been notified of the coercion. They're now investigating whether any permits were issued fraudulently. The meeting continued for nearly 2 more hours. Testimonies were shared, documents passed around, and by night's end, the community voted, overwhelmingly, to remove the entire board. New interim officers were elected, a full forensic audit approved, and a bylaw review committee formed to prevent future abuses. As neighbors filed out, Margaret approached me. I knew something felt wrong, she said softly. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Why didn't you? I asked. Thomas convinced us that your property was dragging down our values, that your refusal to comply was selfish. I never bothered to fact-check. Out in the parking lot, Thomas waited for me. He looked broken. You destroyed everything, he hissed. My project, my name, my future. This isn't over. Actually, said a voice behind us, it is. Officer Martinez stepped into view, accompanied by another officer. Thomas Reynolds, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and property damage. Handcuffs clicked shut. Diane froze by their rental car, her own still out of commission from the spike incident, watching helplessly as her husband was escorted into the back of the cruiser. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered the destroyed gate, the fake violations, the threats. He told me we were helping the neighborhood, Diane whispered, without looking at me, that this project would fix everything. She climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove away. Whether I'd ever see her again, I didn't know, but under the stars that night, Walking home past neighbors waving and smiling for the first time in weeks, I finally felt at peace. The fight for our neighborhood wasn't over, but the worst of it was behind us. The battle was over, and for the first time in months, I finally felt like I had won. 6 months passed quickly. Spring arrived with fresh blooms carpeting the Pine Haven gardens, even in my front yard, now fully restored and spike-free. The security cameras still watched silently from the eaves, but the spikes were gone. Neighbors still joked about them whenever someone new moved in. Remember when Diane's tires went pop? Mr. Franklin would grin, making dramatic sound effects. At 78, he'd become something of a local legend after helping me install those infamous deterrents. The new HOA board was a completely different animal, transparent, accountable. Meetings were now recorded and shared online. Every dollar spent required dual signatures and monthly reviews by a rotating committee of residents. Thomas Reynolds had pleaded guilty to reduced charges, financial misconduct. He paid restitution and narrowly avoided jail time. His grand development dream had been sold off to a new company, one now working with city officials to find proper access routes. Diane filed for divorce shortly after the fallout and quietly moved out of state. Kevin offered a public apology and withdrew from HOA activities entirely. And surprisingly, Margaret became one of the most active reformers, using her knowledge to help close every loophole she once overlooked. One bright morning, I was sipping my coffee on the porch when Emma dropped by with a newspaper in hand. "You're on the front page again," she teased. The headline read, "State Bill Proposes Homeowner Protection After HOA Scandal." The article described how our neighborhood's turmoil had sparked a legislative effort, a bill to protect corner lot owners from forced easements and to limit the reach of HOA powers. "They're calling it the Spike Law," Emma grinned as she walked away. Just then, a moving truck rolled up to the old Reynolds house, long vacant since Thomas and Diane's departure. "New neighbors," Emma observed. "Let's hope they're better than the last ones." That afternoon, while trimming my hedges, now carefully kept within regulation height, a couple strolled over. "Hi there," the woman called. "We just moved in. I'm Sarah Chun, and this is my husband, Michael." We shook hands. "Welcome to Pine Haven," I said warmly. "We heard this place has quite a history," Michael chuckled. "Something about the previous owner and a gate fiasco." I smiled. "It's a long story, but it taught us all a lot about boundaries and standing your ground." Sarah nodded. "We're just excited to be part of the community. The HOA president already stopped by with the welcome packet. She seems really nice." "Emma's the best," I said. "Things work differently here now. The HOA is here to support us, not control us." As they walked away, I noticed a familiar car slowly creeping past. Diane. She looked older, more fragile. Our eyes met just for a second before she pressed the accelerator and disappeared down the street. That evening, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "I'm sorry for what we did to you," the letter began. "Thomas believed it was the only way to save the neighborhood. I believed him, but I should have questioned it. You didn't deserve what we put you through. I regret it deeply. Sometimes standing up to bullies means standing up to the people you love. I couldn't do that, but you did, and now everyone's better for it." I folded the letter and put it away, not out of anger, but with a strange sense of peace. Closure. Emma had asked me several times to join the new HOA board. Until now, I had politely declined. But maybe it was time. Time to help guide the future we'd fought so hard to rebuild.